Minnesota winters are harsh. Especially by January, the air is freezing cold, and your breath disappears in white mist. Deborah Watson gazed at the snowy landscape outside her window. She had gotten up at 5:30 as usual and was preparing to leave her apartment by 6:15. Work at Heartland Logistics started at 8 o'clock. In 30 years, Deborah had never been late. Looking at herself in the old mirror, she acknowledged the fine wrinkles on her face. She had lost the energy to dye the silver threads mixed with her black hair. "Deborah Watson, you're still alive today," she whispered to herself. It was a morning ritual she had learned from her mother. The apartment was small, but it was enough for Deborah. Actually, it was almost too big for someone living alone. The walls were decorated with a few family photos and pictures drawn by her niece's children who visited occasionally. Her life was simple but orderly. It reflected her life itself. Her work at Heartland Logistics was the same way. Meticulous, honest, and above all, valuing accuracy. She was known by her colleagues as Dependable Deborah, and when customers had inquiries, they would say, "Deborah would know," that's how much they trusted her. She had built a special friendship with Martha Klein in particular. Martha was a colleague who worked in the accounting department. The two had shared joys and sorrows over the years. She was always invited to Martha's son Michael's birthday parties, and on the day he graduated from college, she felt as proud as if her own nephew had grown up. At 7:20, Deborah sat in her usual seat and turned on her computer. "Good morning, Deborah. It's cold again today." Martha approached her desk with a warm cup of coffee. "Thank you, Martha," Deborah smiled. "We have a meeting today, don't we?" Martha frowned. "Yes, Victor called a company-wide meeting. I wonder if it's about staff reductions again." Deborah nodded silently. Victor Heartland was the son of founder Joseph Heartland and had taken over the company after his father's death. The once warm and family-like atmosphere of Heartland Logistics had been completely changed by Victor's cold management policies. His methods of prioritizing profits and forcing longtime employees into voluntary retirement, one after another, had spread fear and anxiety throughout the company. "Don't worry," Deborah said in a tone meant to reassure Martha. "We're in important positions." But deep down, Deborah also felt uneasy. Just last week, George, a veteran in the accounting department, had suddenly announced his voluntary retirement. Rumor had it that he had been targeted because he expressed opposition to Victor's proposal during a meeting. While organizing her papers, Deborah suddenly remembered the late Joseph Heartland, Victor's father. He had been a mild-mannered and fair manager who treasured his employees like family. When Deborah joined the company, it was truly a Heartland in the real sense of the word. "My job is more than just clerical work," Deborah thought to herself. In the back of her desk drawer were documents she had collected over the years. Evidence of Victor's accounting fraud, unfair treatment of employees, tax evasion. Deborah had been quietly but surely recording all of it. It was a dangerous secret, but she had a mission to fulfill. The chirping of small birds announcing the arrival of spring colored the morning in Springfield. As usual, Deborah Watson parked her car in the Heartland Logistics employee parking lot at 7:15. Her beloved car was a 15-year-old Japanese model, but it was still running strong. "An organized space creates organized thoughts," that was her mother's saying. Her desk embodied those words, with only the essentials arranged on it. Computer, phone, notepad, and her handmade pen holder. As a daily ritual, she wiped her desk and checked the day's schedule. "I've got documents from accounting," she murmured softly. The accounting department at Heartland Logistics worked in conjunction with her department, and Deborah was always valued for her accurate data entry and verification. But her eyes saw more than just rows of numbers. With years of experience, she could immediately spot unnatural transactions and contradictory figures. "Good morning, Deborah," Martha greeted her with a smile. "You're quite early this morning." "I have some documents I wanted to check," Deborah replied with a smile. Well, that's just like you, Martha said jokingly. I've never seen anyone so dedicated to their work. Working at the same company for 30 years and still having such passion. Deborah shrugged. It's habit. And, she continued, choosing her words carefully, I have a special attachment to this company. No one, including Martha, knew the true nature of that special attachment. Deborah's joining Heartland Logistics was no coincidence. Of course, her excellent clerical skills and integrity were genuine. But deep in her heart, she had a mission she hadn't revealed to anyone. 10 o'clock coffee break. As Deborah was checking her company email, she received an urgent request from the CFO's office. Please urgently verify records of special accounting procedures for the past 3 years. Special accounting procedures. Deborah furrowed her brow. As far as she knew, no such item existed in the official accounting. But a request from the CFO couldn't be ignored. She accessed the password-protected accounting system and began searching for the requested information. And she found it. A folder labeled Victor Special Account. Something that shouldn't be visible with normal access privileges. The fact that she could access it with her authority might have been due to an old bug in the system design. Or perhaps it was thanks to the implicit trust given to her due to her many years of service. It contained complex transaction records transferring company profits to a separate account. The destination was a bank account in the Cayman Islands. The recipient name was Victoria Enterprises, a company personally owned by Victor Heartland. Deborah took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling slightly. She had been collecting fragmentary evidence for months, but this was the first time she had found such clear evidence of fraud. She quietly took out her smartphone and took several screenshots of the screen. What are you looking at? Startled by the sudden voice, Deborah nearly jumped. Turning around, she found Victor Heartland standing right behind her desk. With his usual cold smile, arms folded. I was verifying the special accounting procedures as requested by the CFO, Deborah replied, maintaining her composure. I see, Victor's eyes narrowed. You are always diligent. It's for the company, Deborah smiled gently. My father seemed to value you highly, Victor said, looking out the window. 30 years ago, when he hired you, he said, Deborah is special. I still remember that. Deborah didn't answer. Hearing Joseph Heartland's words gave her a feeling of tightness in her chest. But times have changed, Victor continued coldly. Old carriages are useless on new roads. Understand? It was a threat. That was clear to Deborah. She just nodded silently. Have a good day, Victor cast a meaningful glance and left. That night, Deborah sat at her kitchen table at home, spreading out materials she had collected over 30 years. Discrepancies in company books, evidence of Victor's embezzlement, records of unfair treatment of employees. And the screenshots of the Victor special account she had just discovered. Everything was prepared for tomorrow. For Deborah's retirement day. The phone rang. It was from Martha. Deborah, are you okay? Martha's voice was tinged with worry. I saw Victor standing in front of your desk today. I'm fine, Martha, Deborah answered reassuringly. He just came to give me a warning. A warning? Martha's voice trembled. Deborah, be careful. The president has been talking about you a lot lately. Not in a good way. Deborah exhaled deeply. Thank you, Martha. But don't worry. There's something important tomorrow. Something important. Yes. Something I've been waiting for 30 years. After hanging up, Deborah stared at the pile of evidence spread out on the dining table. Then she took out a small wooden box. Inside was an old photograph carefully preserved. It showed a young Joseph Heartland and a young Deborah in a family photo. Deborah's final day of work began with the gentle light of a spring morning. She got dressed a little more carefully than usual, adorning her neck with the pearl necklace she treasured. She had worn this same necklace on the day she first came to work at Heartland Logistics 30 years ago. "Today is the last day," Deborah said to the mirror. Her expression was a mix of anxiety and determination. When she arrived at the office, many of her colleagues were already waiting for her. On the table was a homemade cake with, "Thank you for your hard work, Deborah," written on it. On the wall hung a photo collage celebrating her 30 years of service. "Thank you, everyone," Deborah said, her voice trembling with emotion. Tears glistened in her eyes. For someone who had no real family, these workplace colleagues were like family to her. Martha hugged her tightly. "This place won't be the same without you," she said, tearing up. "Keep in touch, promise." "Of course," Deborah smiled. "You're my best friend, Martha." Warm words from each person, small gifts. Deborah spent half the day engraving everything in her heart. The relationships she had built with these people were real. That made what she was about to do today weigh even more heavily on her heart. But she had a mission. Something she had planned and prepared for since 30 years ago. Just after noon, Deborah's desk phone rang. The voice flowing from the receiver was Victor's secretary. "Ms. Watson, the president would like to see you. Please come to the president's office right away." As she crossed the office floor, she felt the gazes of her colleagues. It was rare for Victor to meet personally with retiring employees. Especially those who had been working so long that he called them relics of the past. The hallway to the president's office felt long. On the walls of the corridor hung photographs showing the history of Heartland Logistics. A portrait of founder Joseph Heartland. The old building from when the company was established. And Deborah stopped. There was a group photo of young Joseph and his first employees. She had seen that photo hundreds of times, but today there was a special significance. "The beginning of the end," she whispered softly. The door to the president's office was a heavy wooden door made of high-quality Minnesota oak. Deborah took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," Victor's low voice was heard from inside. Stepping into the president's office, Deborah gasped. The spacious room was uniformly furnished with expensive furniture, and the large windows offered a panoramic view of Springfield. On the wall next to the window hung a large portrait of founder Joseph Heartland. Victor sat in an expensive leather chair, looking down at Deborah from across his desk. Even at 62, he maintained a muscular and intimidating presence. "Deborah, please sit down," he indicated the chair in front of his desk. Deborah quietly complied. She placed both hands on her knees and straightened her back. 30 years, you've lasted quite long," Victor said with irony. A cold calculation resided in his eyes. "I enjoyed the work," Deborah answered quietly. There was no falsehood in her words. Working at Heartland Logistics had been her life itself. "Yes, you were always, how shall I put it, overly enthusiastic," Victor said, leaning his chair back. "Sometimes a bit too meddlesome." Deborah didn't answer. She just returned his gaze with a calm expression. "Now, about your retirement package," Victor took a brown envelope from his desk drawer. "For a long-time employee like you, I'd like to show the company's gratitude with a special consideration." He handed the envelope to Deborah. The envelope was light. Too light. "Open it," Victor raised the corner of his mouth. There was cruelty in that smile. Deborah opened the envelope and took out a piece of paper. It was a check. In the amount field was written $1. "Is this a joke?" Deborah asked, still staring at the check. Her voice was calm, but her heart was beating rapidly. "No, I'm serious," Victor smiled with satisfaction. "At your age, you're just waiting to die anyway, so this should be enough, right?" Those words pierced Deborah's heart like a sharp blade. But her expression didn't change. "This constitutes wrongful termination," Deborah said matter-of-factly. Don't worry. This isn't a crime, Victor laughed loudly. His laughter echoed off the luxurious ceiling of the president's office. Now, pack your things and get out. Deborah slowly stood up. Then she quietly took out her cell phone. What are you doing? Victor frowned. His smile disappeared at her sudden action. I have something I want to show you, Deborah said calmly. There was a strength in her voice that had never been heard before. She displayed an old photograph. It showed young Joseph Hartland and young Deborah. They were smiling, and Joseph was holding up little Deborah. The blood drained from Victor's face. That is. I am Joseph Hartland's daughter, Deborah declared quietly but forcefully. And I am one of the rightful heirs to this company. That's a lie. My father didn't have. Victor's voice was trembling. He grabbed the desk, trying to stand up. Deborah continued. Your mother Elizabeth and my mother Sarah were sisters. Your father, my uncle, wanted to take me in after my mother died. But your mother wouldn't allow it. She scrolled her phone further and showed an image of an old letter. It was a letter signed by Joseph Hartland. My uncle couldn't legally recognize me as his daughter. However, he established a trust fund for me and left 25% of the company's shares to me in his will. Victor's face turned pale, and he collapsed into his chair. That's my father's signature. I've already contacted lawyers. All the evidence of your accounting fraud is in place, Deborah continued quietly. She displayed another file. Secret accounts in the Cayman Islands, tax evasion, personal use of company assets. Everything is documented. Deborah placed the $1 check on the desk. You might need this. She slowly began walking toward the door. Her back was straight, as if relieved of a 30-year burden. Wait! Victor shouted. What do you want? Money? Position? Deborah turned around and showed a genuine smile for the first time. What I want is justice. And to carry on my uncle's wishes. To return the company he built to his principals. Before opening the door, she said finally, my lawyer will contact you tomorrow. By then, you'll need to make a choice. Admit everything honestly, or fight in court. When Deborah left the president's office, the office floor was silent. Her colleagues seemed to have noticed the change in her, watching with surprised expressions. She walked straight to Martha. Deborah, what happened? Martha asked worriedly. It's a long story, Martha, Deborah smiled gently. But from today, many things will change. For the better. She returned to her desk and picked up the small potted plant she had used for 30 years. Goodbye, she whispered softly. The town of Springfield was bathed in early summer sunlight. At the Heartland Logistics headquarters, 1 week after Deborah's confession, an extraordinary board meeting had been convened. The expressions of the directors sitting around the heavy marble conference table were stiff, and tension filled the room. The wooden door opened, and Deborah Watson entered with 2 lawyers. The directors murmured among themselves at the sight of someone who had worked as a clerk for 30 years now about to take the head seat at the table. Good morning, everyone, Deborah greeted in a composed voice. She was dressed in a black suit, with Joseph Hartland's gold tie pin that he had cherished during his lifetime attached as a brooch at her chest. Today is a special day. A day to decide the future of Heartland Logistics. Victor Hartland sat at the edge of the table, looking unwell and clearly disturbed. The company's legal counsel stood by his side. First, let me formally explain who I am, Deborah said calmly. I am Joseph Hartland's niece, and according to his will, I am the heir to 25% of this company's shares. She distributed documents she received from her lawyer to each director. These are copies of Joseph Hartland's will, created in the presence of a notary. They were kept by Greenwood Law Office, the executor of the will. The room fell silent. The directors looked at the documents with expressions of surprise. We have already completed DNA testing, added Claire Morrison, Deborah's chief lawyer. The blood relationship between Deborah Watson and Joseph Heartland is scientifically proven. But, one of the directors, Grayson, spoke up. Why did you stay silent for 30 years? Why didn't you come forward until now? All eyes turned to Deborah. She took a deep breath and answered quietly. My father, that is, my uncle Joseph, gave me two options. Either to step forward immediately and claim my inheritance rights, or to first know the true face of the company from the inside. Deborah looked around the table. I chose the latter. Because I wanted to truly know my father's company. And I wanted to protect what my father had built. She continued, while working as a clerk, I got to know every corner of this company and the people who work here. Over those 30 years, I also saw how my father's principles were gradually lost. Deborah looked at Victor. He had lowered his eyes. And unfortunately, I also discovered serious misconduct by the current management. She distributed another file. It contained evidence of Victor's embezzlement of company funds, tax evasion, and unfair treatment of employees. Detailed accounting records, details of secret accounts, copies of internal emails. The evidence collected over 30 years was overwhelming. An external audit team has already begun an investigation, lawyer Morrison explained. At the current stage, it is estimated that approximately $12 million has been misappropriated. Shocked voices rose from among the directors. Some showed anger, others seemed grief-stricken. Grayson shook his head vigorously. Victor, is this true? Victor didn't answer. His silence told everything. Deborah continued quietly, today, I demand two things. First, recognition of my 25% shares and a seat on the board of directors as per my father's will. Second, a complete review of the current management structure. She declared resolutely, this company should regain the integrity and trust that my father built. Heartland Logistics is not just a company that transports things. It's a company that transports people's lives and dreams. The deliberation lasted 3 hours. As the investigation progressed, Victor's misconduct became more evident. Embezzlement of company funds, tax evasion, unfair treatment of employees, even his former close associates began to distance themselves from Victor one after another. Late in the afternoon, cornered, Victor approached Deborah. There was unmistakable desperation on his face. Deborah, cousin, he said in a low voice. Let's talk. Let's settle this. Let's split it half and half. We're siblings, after all. Deborah looked at him straight in the eye and answered firmly, this is not about my revenge, but a matter of justice. I have a duty to protect the company my father entrusted to me. In the end, the board unanimously accepted Deborah's demands. Victor would step down as CEO and be held accountable for returning the misappropriated funds and facing legal responsibility. As the meeting drew to a close, an unexpected proposal was made to Deborah. Ms. Watson, Director Grayson said, we would like you to take on the position of executive officer. Your integrity and deep understanding of the company are essential for the rebuilding ahead. While expressing her gratitude, Deborah announced a surprising decision. I will retain my voice as a 25% shareholder of this company. However, management needs a new perspective from the younger generation. She quietly stood up and reached out her hand toward the door of the conference room. There waited Michael, Martha's son. At 35, he had gained experience in the logistics industry and was known for his innovative vision. Everyone, I'd like to introduce Michael Klein, Deborah said with a smile. I recommend him as the new CEO. Michael entered the conference room with confidence and concisely explained his own vision. Environmentally conscious logistics systems, employee-first management philosophy, coexistence with the local community, these resonated with Joseph Heartland's principles. 30 years ago, when I first set foot in this company, there was a family-like warmth in this place, Deborah addressed them finally. And today, we are taking the first step to regain that spirit. She concluded calmly but powerfully, this company is my father's legacy. But at the same time, it is the future of everyone who works here. After the board meeting ended, Deborah remained alone in the empty conference room. The evening view of Springfield visible through the large window was wrapped in golden light. She remembered when she first came to this town 30 years ago. Young, hurt but filled with determination. Her quiet thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Martha was peering in. Deborah, she had tears in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Deborah shrugged. I needed to keep it a secret. But now, it's different. To think you recommended my son as CEO. Martha's voice choked. He's the best person for the job, Martha, Deborah answered sincerely. Honest, innovative, and above all, someone who values people. The two embraced in silence. Their 30-year friendship had deepened with new understanding and respect. Come on, let's go, Deborah said gently. We can't be late for the first dinner of the new Heartland Logistics. As they left the conference room, the setting sun gently shone on the portrait of Joseph Heartland hanging in the hallway. Deborah paused for a moment and nodded slightly toward the portrait. As summer neared its end, the trees in Springfield were beginning to change color. At the Heartland Logistics headquarters, 3 months after Deborah's confession, the winds of reform continued to blow. A new logo had been raised, and a plaque inscribed with the principles of founder Joseph Heartland had been installed in the entrance hall. Deborah was coming to the office 2 days a week as a director. Her small office was simple but warm. The walls were decorated with photos of memories with her father and photos with colleagues from her days as a clerk. Deborah, the report is ready, Michael Klein entered the office. Since taking office as the new CEO, he had been energetically working on company reforms. Thank you, Michael, Deborah smiled. How is it? According to the audit team's final report, the amount embezzled by Victor totals about $15 million, Michael said gravely. It exceeds the initial estimate by $3 million. Deborah exhaled deeply. More serious than I thought. But there's good news too, Michael's expression brightened. The reform plan is progressing smoothly. Employee satisfaction has risen significantly, and new contracts are increasing. In particular, the employee support fund you proposed has generated a big response. Deborah nodded with satisfaction. She felt a deep joy that her father's company was heading in the right direction. At that moment, there was a knock on the office door, and Martha poked her head in. Deborah, there's a call from the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office was preparing for Victor's criminal indictment. Deborah took the phone, talked for a while, then quietly put the receiver down. Victor apparently tried to flee overseas, she said, looking out the window. But he was detained at the airport. Now he's under house arrest after paying bail. Michael and Martha were silent. The fall of the once strict manager evoked complex emotions for everyone. I intend to go see him, Deborah expressed her determination. The next day, Deborah visited Victor's home with her lawyer, Morrison. The mansion that had once been luxurious now gave a neglected impression. The garden was unkempt, and the house was dimly lit. Victor was sitting on the sofa in the living room. In just 3 months, he had deteriorated remarkably. His hair was white, and deep wrinkles were carved into his face. Why did you come? To laugh at me, he said in a bitter tone. No. I've brought a settlement proposal, Deborah answered calmly. There was no resentment in her voice. If you honestly admit all your misconduct and return the embezzled funds, there's a possibility the company will withdraw its charges. Victor looked at her with a confused expression. Why would you do that? Because we're cousins with the same father. And because it's my duty to protect my father's company, Deborah answered quietly. A month later, Victor accepted the proposal. He officially apologized and agreed to return all his assets to the company. His sentence was reduced, but he was permanently banned from returning to the company. As autumn deepened, Deborah happened to see Victor at a suburban cafe. Thin and aged, he was drinking coffee alone, staring out the window. Deborah hesitated a little but approached his table. "May I sit down?" she asked quietly. Surprised, Victor nodded silently. After a moment of silence, he opened his mouth. "Why are you here?" he asked bitterly. "Isn't this revenge?" Deborah shook her head. "We are, after all, cousins with the same father. Father would have wanted us to reconcile." After a long silence, Victor took out a $1 bill from his pocket. "That check." "I'm sorry." Deborah looked at the $1 bill and smiled quietly. "Now we're even." That day, they began talking as cousins for the first time. It would take a long time to heal the wounds of the past, but they had taken the first step toward reconciliation. On her way home, walking through the twilight streets of Springfield, Deborah reflected on the journey that had begun 30 years ago. She had saved her father's company, upheld justice, and above all, been able to provide a dignified future for the colleagues she had worked with for many years. "I've fulfilled my promise, Dad," she whispered, looking up at the sunset-colored sky. Perhaps true family is not just about blood ties, but about relationships where people recognize each other, respect each other, and sometimes can forgive each other. Deborah continued walking toward a new tomorrow with a quiet smile.